The year was 1839, and the air in Canton carried a strange tension. Along the Pearl River, where merchants once bartered silks and spices beneath lantern light, a different cargo began to pass in silence. Small wooden chests, carved with foreign symbols, were offloaded in the dead of night. They carried not gold nor jewels, but something far more insidious, a powder that could dissolve nations from the inside out. Opium, bitter smoke curling through the alleys of China's most powerful dynasty. In the palaces of Beijing, mandarins in embroidered robes reported the decay with dread. Villages where farmers once bent to the rhythm of the earth now lay slack, men dazed in opium dens, women pawning heirlooms for one more pipe. The King Court decreed it must end. Commissioner Lin Zexu, a man of iron resolve, ordered the seizure of the foreign poison. In one sweeping act, thousands of chests were broken open and poured. Into the sea, the waves blackened with ruin. He wrote to Queen Victoria herself, demanding to know, "What right have you to flood our land with death? Would you wish it done unto yours?" No reply came, or perhaps the silence itself was the reply. For across the sea, another empire stirred, an island nation whose ships pierced horizons like iron teeth. Great Britain, still glowing from its victories over Napoleon, now sought dominion not only of lands, but of trade routes, of markets, of the invisible veins of wealth that pulsed across oceans. To them, China was not a sovereign world, but a locked gate, and opium was the key. The armies that prepared to sail were small by the count of soldiers. A few thousand red-coated infantry, muskets polished and bayonets sharpened. A scattering of engineers, sailors, and marines. Compared to the millions who lived under the King banner, it was a whisper of force, almost laughable. And yet, within their grasp, they carried something far more devastating than numbers. Technology honed by centuries of ceaseless conflict, ships built of steel and steam, cannons whose thunder could shatter stone walls from beyond sight. Still, when the first sails appeared on China's coast, few believed an island people could unmake. A dynasty. The king had ruled for centuries. Their armies were vast, their bureaucracy stretched from desert to mountain to sea. In the minds of many, they were unshakable. But history often moves not with the roar of inevitability, but with the quiet turning of hidden gears. Travelers of the time tell strange stories. Villagers who had never seen a cannon described the fire dragons that roared from British ships, hurling iron balls that could sink a junk with a single strike. Soldiers in silk-padded armor marched with spears and matchlocks centuries old, only two-face rifles that spat death in rapid succession. At the Battle of Chuenpi, the King fleet, grand in number, adorned with banners that snapped in the wind, was torn apart in hours by warships that fought like predators of another age. And yet, beyond the clash of steel and smoke, there was another layer, something more subtle, almost invisible. An empire built on ritual, hierarchy, and obedience met an empire built on invention, speed, and ruthless efficiency. The king fought by tradition, the British by calculation. One side believed in the weight of history, the other in the precision of science. Some records say king commanders refused to relay bad news to Beijing, fearing the wrath of the court more than the advance of the enemy. Defeats were softened, reports censored. The emperor left blind to the scale of collapse until it was too late. Imagine it, a ruler seated in the grandeur of the Forbidden City, surrounded by scholars reciting the classics, while beyond the palace walls foreign shells were reducing entire forts to rubble. The contrast is haunting. In those same years, Britain's factories roared with steam engines, their cities blackened by coal, their inventors sketching telegraphs and locomotives. In China, artisans still hammered iron by hand, their greatest weapons modeled on designs centuries old. It was not merely armies that clashed, but centuries, even worlds. And in that collision, the question arose like a shadow stretching across time. How could so few undo so many? How could an island nation's fragments of soldiers bring a dynasty of millions to its knees? The answer is not simple. It lies not only in firepower, nor only in corruption, nor only in arrogance. It is woven in hidden threads of opium smoke that dulled a people, of technology that widened the gulf between East and West, of rulers trapped in the rituals of the past while the world's tempo quickened around them. Tonight, as we trace the quiet march of these shadows, we must listen closely to the whispers of history. For in the fall of the king to a few thousand men lies not just the story of one war, but of how entire civilizations rise or crumble when the balance between tradition and change tilts too far. And yet, this was only the opening move. The true unraveling, the deeper mysteries of how so small a force conquered so vast a land, wait further in the labyrinth of history. The records that survive from those first clashes are uneven, like pages scorched by fire. Some come from British officers, crisp in detail, proud of their victories. Others, scattered through Qing archives, are wrapped in euphemism, as if words themselves might soften the sting of defeat. Yet if we listen carefully, in the spaces between them, a stranger truth emerges, one that lingers like the smoke after cannon fire. At the Battle of the Bogue, the king prepared with grandeur. Fortresses bristled with cannons, banners of the Dragon Empire rose high, drums thundered across the river. To the soldiers of China, it must have seemed impregnable, and yet British warships approached with the calm of predators. Their guns rotated on iron carriages, their shot carried farther and truer than anything the king could muster. In minutes, walls that had stood for generations cracked and crumbled, defenders fleeing in terror at a weapon they had never seen. It is easy, from the distance of centuries, to explain this away as simple technology, as muskets against matchlocks, as steamships against wooden junks. But in the eyes of those who lived it, the difference was not only of machines, but of worlds colliding. A king's soldier wrote of his horror, describing the British cannon as thunder without clouds, fire without smoke. Another described the ships as moving fortresses, whose iron sides swallowed every strike. Their words read less like military reports and more like accounts of witnessing sorcery. But the deeper mystery is this: why were these men, who had once guarded the mightiest empire on earth, so unprepared? How had centuries of power left them so vulnerable to a handful of foreign soldiers? Some answers lie buried in the slow decay of the king system itself. Reports were filtered through layers of bureaucracy, each official fearful of speaking truth lest it reflect poorly on his loyalty. Generals often hid losses, claiming victories in dispatches that were anything but true. In such silence, defeats multiplied in the shadows until they could no longer be concealed. By the time the court realized the scale of disaster, it was already too late, and while officials hesitated, British officers wrote in journals that survive to this day. One recalled entering Chinese fortifications after battle and finding stacks of ancient weapons, pikes, crossbows, rusted matchlocks, relics preserved in arsenals, as if time itself had stopped. They fought, he wrote, as if they had not known the last 2 centuries had passed. Yet perhaps the most chilling detail is not military at all, but philosophical. The Qing Empire governed not merely through arms, but through belief. The emperor was the son of heaven, the cosmic pivot between earth and sky. His authority was eternal, his mandate unquestionable. And so when British victories mounted, many officials could not even conceive of reporting them fully, for how could heaven itself allow foreigners to triumph over the Middle Kingdom? Such news was not only dangerous to utter, it was almost impossible to believe. Meanwhile, the British had no such illusions. Their empire was not built on timeless ritual, but on relentless adaptation. If a musket was slow, they built rifles. If a cannon was heavy, they forged it lighter, stronger, deadlier. They thrived on invention, on the restless turning of gears and minds. It was as if one empire had chained itself to the wisdom of ancestors, while the other had loosed itself into the winds of modernity, and the winds carried iron and fire. Travelers' accounts hint at the human cost beneath the strategy. Villagers fled burning towns, their crops trampled by soldiers, their families caught between two empires neither fully served. One Jesuit missionary recorded walking through a ruined settlement where children searched through ash for food, while in the distance the thunder of British guns shook the earth. He wrote, "It is not the army that is defeated, but the people themselves, crushed between heaven and iron." Yet still, the British did not march to conquer, in the old sense. They did not seek to topple the forbidden city or replace the dragon throne. Their war was stranger, quieter, a war for ports, for trade, for the thin threads of silver and opium that bound economies together. They sought not land, but access. not conquest but control. This made them harder to fight, for the king prepared for invasion. But what they faced was something subtler, almost ghost-like. A small force that did not seek to occupy, only to bleed, to open gates, to pry apart the seams of empire. And so the mystery deepens, for when one reads the treaties that followed, treaties written in the clipped language of victors, it becomes clear that Britain never needed to conquer all of China. By defeating only a few forts, by breaking only a few armies, they unspooled the tapestry of the king. Ports were ceded, trade was forced open. Hong Kong was surrendered, the empire of millions bent to the will of thousands. What does this reveal about power? That it is not always measured in armies, nor in numbers, nor even in guns. Sometimes it rests in perception, in the ability to strike where an enemy is weakest, to unravel their confidence, to make the invincible appear fragile. Perhaps that is why the accounts of British officers, written with the calm of men on routine duty, contrast so violently with the desperation in king letters. One side felt inevitable, the other trapped in disbelief. And still, the trail leads deeper. For behind the smoke of cannons and the ink of treaties lies something stranger still, the unseen consequences that rippled outward, changing not only China, but the world itself. The balance of empires shifted, a door once closed swung open, and the centuries that followed would never be the same. But that is a chamber history never meant us to see so clearly. In the dim archives of Beijing, there survives a letter, its ink faded but its pain still sharp. A provincial governor, writing after the fall of another fortress, confessed, "We fight, yet it is as if heaven no longer hears us. Their ships are demons of iron, their fire unquenchable. We are children throwing stones at thunder." Such words rarely reached the emperor. By the time they did, the empire's fate had already been carved into paper and sealed with wax. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842 ended the First Opium War, but its ending was no victory, it was a cutting open. Hong Kong was surrendered, 5 ports forced open to British trade. Silver bled out of the country, and opium flowed back in like a tide that could never be stemmed. For China, this was not just defeat. It was humiliation, a wound that reached deeper than territory. A people who had once called their land the Middle Kingdom, the axis of the world, were forced to see themselves in the mirror of foreign power. The psychological blow was as devastating as any cannon shot. British officers, in their diaries, often marveled not at their own strength, but at how swiftly the king seemed to unravel. One captain wrote, "It is a curious war, where battles are won before they are fought. We fire a few shots, their banners fall, and the dragons roar. Becomes but a whisper." It was as though the empire, vast as it was, had hollowed from within long before the first cannon fired. And yet, for all the triumph written into British records, there are details that feel almost unsettling, as if they themselves sensed the imbalance was too great. Missionaries described the eerie silence of Chinese towns after British victories, whole streets emptied, doors bolted, not with defiance but with resignation. It is one thing to conquer armies. It is another to unmoor the spirit of a nation. The ripples of this war stretched far beyond its shores. For China, it marked the beginning of what would later be called the Century of Humiliation, an age where foreign powers carved ports and privileges as though slicing meat from a carcass. For Britain, it marked the flowering of its imperial arrogance, the belief that with enough guns and ships, any gate could be forced open, any market pried wide. And for the world, it was a quiet shift, a turning of the tide that rebalanced civilizations. But beneath the facts, beneath the treaties and maps, lies a deeper pattern, one that whispers across history. Civilizations do not fall in a single battle. They falter when they cannot see the world changing around them. The king believed. That tradition itself was a fortress. But tradition without adaptation can become a prison. The British, restless and inventive, became not only soldiers but harbingers of a new age, an age where speed, industry, and firepower remade the order of the earth. And so the haunting question remains, was it truly the British who defeated the king? Or did the king defeat themselves, undone by a system that could not bend, even when bending was the only way to survive? One wonders if history itself is warning us, For every age believes itself secure, eternal, protected by its own walls, whether those walls are made of stone, ritual, or ideology. Yet time and again, it is the small force, the unexpected spark, the few against the many, that shifts the course of centuries. Perhaps that is why the story of a few thousand British soldiers toppling the armies of the king still lingers like a riddle. It is not only a tale of opium and empire, but of fragility, the hidden fragility of even the mightiest civilizations. A fragility that waits, silent, until the moment it is revealed. And so we are left not with answers, but with echoes. What truths lie beneath the stories we are told? How many victories were not victories at all, but the slow collapse of something long weakened? How many defeats are waiting in silence, unnoticed, until they fall upon us as suddenly as thunder? Perhaps the past is not behind us at all, but around us, whispering through every treaty, every ruin, every empire that believed itself eternal. And perhaps the clash on the Pearl River was less about China and Britain, and more about the eternal rhythm of history itself, a rhythm of rise, of complacency, of fall, which truths do. You think history has yet to reveal? Share your thoughts, for the conversation itself is part of the discovery until the next story finds us. Keep listening for the footsteps of the past.